Hello and a warm welcome to every one of you. I appreciate it. I appreciate your continuing participation in the reflective dialectic and your intention to extract some utility from the processes, provocations and propaganda that surround diversity politics, human diversity and life as a value issue. For viewers that float online and on social media, my name is Philip and I present these reflective analysis sessions. As I just alluded to, these sessions provide a chart to navigate through the stormy conditions created by identity politics of being, sex and death. In the first session, I presented, as you would remember, I had it here on the board. We discussed the dialectic paradigm, or a paradigm dialectic, and I kind of undermined your confidence in that process which is used in academia extensively. Since then, I'm trying to restore it, and in the second video, it was a previous one, if I remember correctly, I discussed ways of defining words and defining phrases so that we can have clear discussions and use the dialectic in that way. Remember I said because of all the undefined words, if I can put it that way, it was very difficult to find a way to solve problems, human social problems, if you don't define words clearly. Right, and after the clarity of meaning, we realized that we must avoid the paradigms, projections and equation traps. So in this presentation, I want to restore your confidence in the paradigm dialectic even further by suggesting a reflective evaluation of the information and the issues. So what it's going to be, I'm going to first look at the nature of master narratives. Now, master narratives are the things we normally discuss among ourselves when we get together. And it's kind of, everyone kind of agrees on it or have small disagreements about it. Religion is a master narrative. Liberalism in politics is a master narrative, so it's communism. Now, then we will discuss again the dialectic dynamics and how that can aid synthesis and find a reflective synthesis. And eventually, I will give you some methods that can be used. I think it's about 7 of them, if I remember correctly. And then I will wrap up with my conclusions. Now, just remember, I suggest that the reflective evaluation can extract a synthesis between the modernist thesis and the pre, post and meta-modernist antithesis. You will remember I had it here on the board in the very first session. I haven't reproduced it now. I assume you can remember. Right. Let's jump in and let's talk about master narratives. We all of us, we are using it. So it's just our way of communication in our communication networks. We distribute and redistribute these narratives as valid talking points. So you hear something here and you repeat it. And it's kind of all in a circle. These narratives are living from one person to the other, almost like a virus. Right. Therefore, master narratives are examples of reactive communication. That's what I've just kind of tried to explain, which are not informed by reflective analysis. When you hear a master narrative, you never go into the detail and say, is this correct? Is this correct? Is this false? We never do that. Not to the extent we should. And although these meme strings from within individual minds, we develop it in our heads, as we said before. I call it meme strings. We construct our mental models of reality from it. So that what we discuss among ourselves, the master narratives, becomes our reality. And remember, we spoke about the German philosophers and the Geist, how these informations form the Geist. And at the end, they also shape our culture. Now, master narratives can be characterized as follows. Now, I've got quite a few here. I'll just mention a few. The rest you will get when you will get the written communication about today's session. Right, master narratives are automated. They make meaning. They sidestep much of a cognitive interference. So it doesn't actually go to the cognitive side of the brain, the precortex. It runs very much in the emotional areas of the brain. And they are normally very simple by design. And they demand very little information to ensure a clear, rational mind experience. So we want it to be clear, we want it to be simple, so information is a bit less. And master narratives have energy and time constraints, and that's imposed on the brain capacity, and that's why they are simple structures. They automatically achieve computational efficiency by ignoring most microstates sensed or stored, and therefore they simplify reality. That's actually what they do. And no matter how delusional these master narratives are, and how much they subscribe to supernatural dogmas or social political ideologies, they remain stable and robust. You can just think, if you go onto YouTube and you look at some of the politics going on at the moment, both locally and in Europe and in America, you'll see how robust these master narratives are. Even, if they make no sense at all. And yes, people do follow the people who supply them with these master narratives. They've got a weakness, except for only being very simple kind of narratives. And that weakness is they display a bias to select microstates that favor a desired narrative. So they look after themselves. They try and reinforce themselves. Right. Now, these automated failures actually force you and me to search for additional information. We need to get more information if we are working with master narratives. And that more information help us to find an entanglement within a dialectic between the thesis and the antithesis. None of the above is new scientific breakthrough knowledge. Most is at least 2,500 old teachings. So, a very long time ago, the Greeks already decided that we aren't competent to use our minds competently, if I can put it that way. And even in these modern times, with cell phones and all these robots and things, we still don't know how to use our minds competently. Right, however, in practical use of paradigm dialectic shows performance issues. And remember, we've discussed these performance issues before. The thesis is a projection of an antithesis, remember that? It creates an open duality with simplification or radicalization of extremes, but prevents synthesis. And with isolated opposing social networks with no interconnectedness, there's no entanglement between these networks. It displays a mind reality, remember we talked about that, disconnected that prevents any information complexification dynamics. So actually there's just not enough energy being used to complicate matters. Although we always say things are complicated. Now, it creates a qualitative and quantitative disconnect. That's another performance issue. And today, we're going to see if we can kind of solve that problem just a little. So this is what we're working to, what I've just mentioned. Therefore, the paradigm dialectic changed during its transformation from functional in the idea dialectic theory. Remember what we had, the philosophers? And it becomes dysfunctional in practice. And we're going to overcome this today slightly, this dysfunctionality, and work towards a useful synthesis. And what we must do is consider the dialectic dynamics, consider the functional outcomes, as well as consider the dialectic ethics that relates to human qualities. So we're looking at the dynamics, functional outcomes, and we also look at the ethical side of it. So what is dialectic dynamics? I did not discuss that in the first session with you because that session was already long enough. So there's a simplification dynamic. This is when thesis and the antithesis supports lose all nuances and dilute arguments to more radical slogans. This is the simplification part of it. So normally in the dialectic, as I said, the master narratives, there's some dilution and to a slogan language, which can be radical. But fortunately, there's also a complexification dynamic. This ranges from general information in the physical world to specialized physical psychic complexification in the human mind. So both in the physical world and in the human mind, we can add more information, makes a more complex narrative, and then use that towards our synthesis and our solution. The problem with psych complexification, this is in the mind, is that it generates a massive amount of low quality information, on each of our issues. We should know that, as well as for each of our opposing thesis and antithesis positions. So it just creates information, and so much information that we actually cannot deal with it. And that is why we originally had these paradigm dialectic, to kind of create some structure for information. Right, so that is our problem. We can create too much information. Right, thus, a psychomplification is an emotional entangled process of human learning, development and comprehension within the social structures with definite desired outcomes on all levels. So now we know that the dynamic is a simplification side to it and a complexification side, each with its strong points and weak points. Now, let's talk about the dynamic outcomes of the dialectic. Now, possible outcomes of psychomplification process are the following. The outcome of psychomplification that integrates logos, pathos, and ethos prudently is that it unfolds towards realness, triggers insight that transcend the proximal perspective horizon, and have a useful synthesis as output. If not prudent, it leads to delusion and disaster. I can't remember if I have discussed the proximate perspective horizon with you, but we will come to that at a much later stage. It is just one way of thinking, which is less complicated than a higher level of thinking. And there's these horizons in between, which we must transcend. Right. Now, cognition, or logos, is prudent when it leads, but also recognizes the qualitative value of affection. This is pathos. And local ethnic moral orientations, ethos, and then leads to real-life factual practical outcomes that improves the human conditions. So, cognition is prudent, but it has to do a couple of things. It has to connect to emotion, pathos, and to moral orientation, and it must be practical and improve human condition. So, what about emotion? Given an emotional dominance, the mind falls onto itself and breaks with reality, but the person still experiences clear-minded logos reasoning. This is very important. You will hear a person saying to you, but I'm thinking logically. But they're not. They're not. And this is what we're talking about here. That pathos breaks with reality and you still experience reality, but not really. And that's important, and you'll find that in much of what we're going to discuss in practice. Now, given the lead of pathos and ethos, the two together, the complification may unfold towards suspension of reality with mythos as outcome. Now, mythos is about myths, stories. The usefulness of mythical stories as qualitative output is dependent on the cultural content and the context. So we're going back to culture now. Right. In other words, the outcome need not be factual or rational, but because mythos is intended to secure survival or the progress of a tribe, even on species level, it is fit for purpose and therefore moral. So you will think myths have no value. What we're saying is here, but within a cultural context, myths do have value. It can improve a human condition. It can improve the way we behave and behave with each other in general. Now, next is dialectic ethics. We were talking about the ethos, so let's discuss it. Qualitative measures to minimize harm and evaluate the usefulness of dialectic synthesis are about human qualities. So dialectic ethics is about human qualities. So I've got two here. Duties are practices that include benefits or non-maleficence, self-improvement, metanoia, and other improvements. For instance, agape, justice, gratitude, etc. Now, what do I mean by metanoia? Who knows? Yeah. Metanoia, meta is to go beyond, and noia is new. And it's like to awake from a deep sleep and kind of find yourself again in reality. Agape is a deep caring love with a transformation power to evaluate a non-person's spirituality. It's actually a way to build other people into better people, or even more dramatic than that, is to make a non-person a person. So it's actually a very important thing. Now, one of the other dialectic qualities is virtues. Virtues are practices that include autonomy, independent studies, fairness, honesty, integrity, respectfulness, and a whole lot more which you can add. Now, a useful synthesis is what? It is when the quality and the ethical soundness of a dialectic thesis, antithesis synthesis brings about a geist that provides a boundary, transcendence towards insight. So transcending a boundary, and that boundary we spoke about earlier was a proximal perspective horizon. What it does when it transcends towards insight and at the same time avoids a dystopian scenario of earlier materialist and genetic outcomes. What do I mean by earlier materialist and genetic outcomes? Anyone? Materialist was the guy by the name of Marx, and it was the poor and the rich, the workers and the owners of businesses. And in the genetic one, Hitler and his super race, and the almost people who weren't even a race, which he tried to eliminate. Right. What I'm wondering is how those of you like me had our perspective influenced by this paradigm framework and consequently had our academic output and social conversations shaped by it, have adapted our thinking and reset our information orientation. How did we change? Did we change? Remember, I also used to use this framework for academic work, and it took me many, many years before I started to realize the problems thereof, and start to develop ways of improving it, ways of changing it, and just ways of avoiding it, which I will get to in our next lesson, a way of avoiding it. Right, reflective synthesis as a qualitative measure. Remember, we looked at it through different dialectics, and now as a reflective measure. Information shaping is about the simplification and complexification of narrative positions. We already had that. Reflective power is a form of information shaping that can engage an open dialectic and influence outcomes by using reflective shaping practices, processes, and synthesis. Sorry. And this is what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you 8 different ways, or 7 different ways. Sorry. Okay, of reaching synthesis. Reflective shaping has 2 evaluation patterns to explore the cosmic space of a dialectic. Remember, cosmic space includes meaning. It's a universe plus meaning, by putting it simply. Now, there's a quantitative measurement. Express results as numbers. That's what we do. We call it statistics. That has its own constraints. And there's a qualitative measurement, telling of stories, and express results in terms of social constructs of cosmic significance. We look at beauty, love, goodness, anymore, creative effort, and we add myths as well. And then you get it in practice with paintings, plays, music. All those things are qualitative measures of a reflective dialectic towards a developmental synthesis. Right. Empowerment, enlightenment goal of reflective shaping is a level of reflective practice and synthesis that can push individual transcendence through a proximal horizon. I keep on talking about this horizon today. Sorry about that. Reflective practice, if I can kind of define it, is a mental process focused on self-learning that engages directly with reality through experience, knowledge, moral orientation, and action. And there are quite a few of these structures available in academia. I'll give you some information about that. Now, what happens when we engage in reflection? That's not the same thing as providing critique, which I normally do. Instead, it is a process of proper critical engagement with self and subject during the analysis. Self and subject are both part of his analysis, of his critical analysis. The goal of critical analysis is to establish positive entanglement in an ethical environment. You will hear the word ethics come up quite a couple of times today. It's not what you're going to see when you look at those videos on politics, but let's leave it there. Okay. The reflective process, that's what I'm talking about now, investigates rather cynically, but still sensibly, the products and processes that relate to the dialectic pair. That's the thesis and antithesis. In order to create a more psychological, nuanced, or complex understanding of a thesis and antithesis, and create a functional synthesis. Remember, we spoke about that in the first session. And that functional synthesis must avoid a degenerative open dialectic position. Now, what was this reflective synthesis? Let me just remind you. It refers to a reflective process that attempts to force an interaction between opposing thesis and antithesis perspectives and imprints a reflective bias during evaluation and application. I know it's a lot, and I'm just reading these definitions to you, but you'll get a chance to reread them and try and understand them, and we will discuss them at times in the practical sessions. So it can shape knowledge, simplify complex messages, and complexify simple slogans in search of higher order insight and solutions. We want to get useful, utilitarian, functional, developmental solutions. Right, I was promising you the methods. I'm going to get to that now. I'm not going to discuss each in detail because we're going to be here for longer than what we are intended to be. Now, the first one I've got here is evaluating the performance of dialectic through questioning, which is an exploration, a way to explore it, explore information more. So, what kind of explorative questions can we ask to make a dialectic more complex so that we can get to a solution? Let me read a few. What you can ask, what bind the two dialectic theses together? Look for something that binds them together, thesis and antithesis. You can ask, which of the two extreme positions of a dialectic is supported by an information cloud? The question is, what information each cloud holds? Now, a very proper dialectic doesn't have an information cloud on each of its extremes. It's more normally point positions. It's very, very simple. It's black and white. It's either the one or the other. It's good or bad. But what you now do is move away from what is good or bad and look at what information do I have about what is good, what information do I have about what is bad. And this is how you now get to understand this cloud, which is actually there, but it gets ignored. Right. There's also a continuum between the two extremes. And you must kind of discover this continuum, saying what keeps these two things apart and what connects them. The continuum connects them. Right. Then you can ask yourself, is the synthesis a probability? And what does that probability look like? That's another way of getting to the answer. You can also ask which social networks are involved. And to me, that works very, very well. If you know what they say, follow the money. Just look at which social networks are involved, in each extreme, that is. And then you can ask in what different ways are social networks on the thesis extremes and on the antithesis extreme converging into themselves in order to destroy the middle. And remember, we spoke about that. The way we are using this dialectic is not to find a synthesis. It is absolutely to destroy the other extreme and the middle ground altogether. They actually work together, the two extremes, to destroy the middle ground, probably to get to each other. Right. When we can look at the reflective process, and I've got 3 here by the looks of it, there's entanglement exploration. We use reflection to see if you can entangle the cognitive and the emotional interplay. And a cognitive bias reflects rationally, numbers and reality, and an emotional one, an affective one, reflects irrationality and delusion. But you must look at this interplay to see what is really going on here. Is it delusional or that delusional? It's real, really that real. I said to you, when we get to reflections, I'll give you some names. One of them is Kolb, and he uses a structure for reflections which has experience, feelings, thinking, and action. But that's not the only one. There are quite a few. Now, reflection is synthesis. Now, what I want you to do, but you can't do it now, you're going to have to do it at home. In your mind, make a few-second movie on the thesis and another movie on the antithesis. So use your imagination. And the thesis is, this is good. Make a little movie in your mind about what is, this is good. The same for, this is bad. Really bad. Make that little movie. And then draw a picture, if you can. Or write a poem, or whatever you want to do. To combine your visions, the one for the good, one for the bad. You need to combine those 2 movies now into one movie. And next, interrogate by explaining strengths or usefulness of what you found and the weaknesses that could make you discomfortable. So that's what you do, is you make these 2 movies, combine them, and then you look at strengths or usefulness and weaknesses or discomfort. I think that normally works very well. I can use that. You need to work your imagination. And remember, imagination is a combination of emotion and cognition. Right. I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to go to transcendence. I'm back to the transcendence of a horizon, approximate horizon. Let me read what I wrote. Transcend from single fact through complicit interaction by adding simple rules, by applying simple rules in a multi-idea system to co-evolve in a manner that ascend and then to re-emerge as insight at a higher useful qualitative level, the dialectic. Right, let me put that in simple words. What you normally have is you've got a few simple rules which then goes up one level and give you certain outcomes. Then you use that same simple rules and you go up another level for different outcomes. And this is it's called a complexification process. And much of the natural world of life is based on these complexification processes. So that is the transcendence way, where you try and move from simple rules to something very complex through various levels. And the rules must be agreed upon before you start, and you don't change them. We might have a session on that. Now we get to narrative shaping. And those of you who read a lot, you may have heard of us already. It is social constructs that can be used to reshape rationally with Proteus shaping strategies. Proteus is a Greek god which could change shape, if I remember correctly. Now, the first is Occam's razor. Now, I'm going to make it very simple. It's actually not that simple. Occam's razor is to not assume too much. You need evidence. It's a cognitive function. Then, you haven't heard this one this often, Occam's trowel. Do not simplify too much. So, the slogan is too simple. You need Occam's trowel to make it thicker. Also a cognitive process. Then you've got Occidental's hammer. Now, Occidental refers actually to, there was a Greek god of a hammer, and it's in Western Occidental culture, where this is. And this is to avoid stereotyping and habit thinking. For instance, every time you see a nail, or if you've got a hammer, everything you see is a nail. So you must be aware of that stereotyping, of that simplification. And this is the idea of a hammer necessarily bring forth projections of nails and everything and nothing else. Remember what I said? It's an emotional thing. So you need to steer away from that as far as possible. Then the last one is Occam's chisel. And is to be ethically reflective and create beautiful things, like shaping things for usefulness or for beauty. And it's aesthetically valuable, and it looks for meaning, and it uses the imagination. Remember when we created those stories earlier? We used our imagination. This is it. Now, these are the 4 called Proteus strategies to shape narratives. And if you use them, you can really create a complex narrative, and quite a viable one. Then I've got computational strategies, and that is, you must mine for information. You must seek enough information so that there's variation in that information to enrich your data, and then you must select from there what is useful for you. So what you do is you apply Occam's razor and Occam's trowel by mining this information. Then you are looking for interactive patterns, which are dependent on the capacity of a system. Whether that system is your mind or anything else. It's the energy available to you, actually. And the extensiveness, the reach of information, and the networks which is involved. Can you go across different networks? Can you entangle different social networks in your information? And then we've already had reflection. I'm not going to discuss it, but that's Occam's chisel. And all information must be evaluated for trustworthiness. This is reliability and validity. The people who does research will know about those 2 words. Right. Evaluation must consider intended and unintended impact. For example, natural morality based on codes of survival, selection, and variation may fall short to navigate interactions in sophisticated, thriving, in technologically rich in civilizations. On the other hand, goodness promoted by purity codes may be neither ethical nor legal. And you can say to me, but that's impossible. Well, they chased after witches a couple of 100 years ago. I can't see how that can be ethical. I just can't see that. I cannot see that it's legal. Actually, chasing of witches is still happening in South Africa. We still have, now and then, a case that becomes public knowledge. So, please, look at the impact of what you're doing. Then I've got philosophical strategies to explore. And I'm just quickly going to go over this. The one is by using logic structures in philosophy. And one of the practical things I'm going to give you to look at today, we'll use a strategy. So you can see how it's used there. It's a Cornelius.org one on CRT. The other one is anagoge, which is Plato's way of a process to come from delusion to reality. And anagoge is, ana is to move up towards the light, and goge is talking about a leader. Maybe I have explained it before, and maybe I'll explain it again at a later stage. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps you must follow, which you'll just read it. We're running out of time. Okay. Anagoge is a measure that adds value because it explores if opposing perspectives synthesize ideas and if ideas can be soiled as well, and it can spin off into more ideas. So anagoge can kind of prevent all these things. Then I've got another one, which I'm just quickly going to run by you, and that was Marcus Aurelius. He used to be a Roman Empire, one of the better ones. Sometimes get it. And he used the Greek philosophers, and he said, you must see objectively. I'm not going to go into that now. Then he said, you must stay with reality. He called it premeditatio. And then he said, you must have an eagle's eyes view, or a bird's eye view, on what's happening. We are engaged here. But what happens if you're coming from this angle and you look at what we are doing here? It's a completely different perspective sometimes. And that can help you to solve a problem. Except if you're a politician. Nothing can solve your problems. Right, and then he's got a fourth thing which he does. And that is he internalizes Socrates, which means that you must ask yourself critical questions and get to those answers. Then the last one. Yes, I can see the smiles. The last one. Spiritually awakening strategies. I've got 2 here. The Jesus idea of creative existence, logos, and creative love, agape. I think I've spoken about agape earlier. Yes, I did. And there's a whole thing on that, and you'll see it in your notes. Then Buddha and his way to enlightenment. The Four Noble Truths, you can look at that, and then the Eightfold Path, where you look at right understanding, right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and right mindfulness and endeavors, and even right concentration, which I think you've got a problem with today, by the looks of it. But, okay, that's the end of it. My conclusion is this. We first discussed master narratives. Then we looked at reflection and the different things it does. And then lastly, we had 7 strategies to complexify or even sometimes simplify information. Now, what must you go and do at home? A continuous practice. Please first explore the above processes and exploit those that resonate with you. Even if you only choose one, I think you should choose more than one, but especially if you're looking at the religious ones, I want you to use another one, at least another one as well. Same when you look at the philosophical ones, I need something else as well. Definitely the reflective one you must do. And then create your own processes if you can. You don't have to stick to these 7 strategies I've given you. You can create your own. Use your imagination. Use your ethicalness. Right. Now, more homework. I want you to go onto YouTube, and I'm going to give you that information. One thing you will look at is What is Critical Race Theory by Canadians.org. And the other one is a South African adaptation of Harper and Crenshaw. Remember we had Crenshaw? And look at them and critique them, and in the next practical session we're going to discuss them. On the previous practice of on bullings, I did some analysis, and it's still a 5-3-2 outcome, meaning those pro-CRT, those pro-conservative, and very few in-betweens. I don't think anything has changed. In the next session, I shall introduce you to a way to avoid the paradigm dialectic. We call it the origins of knowledge mental orientation framework. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your curiosity. Until next time.